Welcome to the Nonprofit Report, your update on nonprofit organizations, issues, and leaders, viewable on YouTube and M. Oppenheim TV. I'm your host, Mark Oppenheim. Today we're chatting with leaders from organizations that are dedicated to preserving history. And we have as our special guest, Neil Barclay, president of the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History in Detroit, Michigan, and Woody Keown, Jr., president and COO of the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center in Cincinnati, Ohio. I am so happy to have you both on. Woody, we've done this before. Neil, it's wonderful that we were able to get some of your time to do this. And so I just want to jump right in and talk about this whole idea of history and telling stories of all Americans to all Americans. I'm a white guy, and I'm talking with two African-American leaders who are telling stories of African-American peoples, artists of the March to Freedom. Neil, let's start off with you, and let's talk about this idea of having a museum. You have 35,000 artifacts. You have a 125 square foot museum. And my real question is, do you consider yourself a fine arts museum, a history museum, a storytelling, cultural museum? What is the nature of the Wright?
Sure. I mean, each of those terms means something different, I think, to different people, right? What is a museum? What is not a museum? But for us, I think we basically consider ourselves a cultural center, if that makes sense. A history museum, sure. We do have artifacts. We have all of the makings of a history museum. But we also now do performance, we do lecture series, we do community events. So we become this kind of gathering place, if you will. And I think this is probably true of a lot of our centers because we tend to be the larger of African American cultural institutions in the cities where you find institutions like the Wright. And so we become, kind of more than just a museum, sort of by default. We were the final, we did the, when Aretha Franklin lied in state, when Rosa Parks lied in state, they were done in the middle of our rotunda. And there was a reason for that, right? They considered that the place where the community could gather to say their final farewells to these icons of our history. So, yeah, we're more like a cultural center, I would say, more than anything. Is how I would describe it. I don't know. What do you think about that?
I think we pretty much see ourselves in the same kind of vein. We will probably move a little bit more on towards being an educational center, but around these cultural issues, particularly as it relates to structural racism and systemic racism and so forth, which stems from emanates from the history around chattel slavery and so forth. But we are actively working and have been for some time to try to I guess kind of get away from this thing of you're just a museum, because we're much more than that. And the community, many institutions and others expect more of us than just to be a museum that just kind of looking in the back and looking in the past. People are looking for us to kind of talk about how do we connect that past with what's going on today, and how we're going to use that, all of this knowledge and information and so forth to make a better future and better community and country and world for all.
When you're talking about your audiences, the people who come through your doors are going to come from different perspectives. But my folks came in as refugees from wars and violence and a certain character of racism into this country in order to find refuge. And then you have other people who came in because they were migrant workers, or they were looking for economic opportunity. You have people who come in from a situation where their forebears and the history of their forebears and the country and the language of their forebears are lost to history. That was stripped from them as they became slaves and as time marched on. And then there are people who really understand their entire background. How do you program so that these very disparate audiences come in and have an experience that is meaningful to them and cause them, Neil, to want to come back and have a second story, particularly when we're talking about an ethnographically oriented museum of the African American experience? How do you connect with somebody who is not African American and might find the stories interesting to them personally? How do you do that?
Well, I think that's the key. We're storytellers by and large. There's no, I think, error in calling us history institutions in the sense that we basically tell stories, and the stories that we tell, I think, certainly at the Wright, are maybe are on topics that people may know a lot about, but our job, we feel, is to bring out those things that people may not know about the subject, right? Or may not have heard as much about.
So, for example,
oh yeah, example, we did a exhibition on voting matters. We called it Voting Matters. And we looked at, where does the voting franchise come from? Who were the basically women who secured the right really to vote for all Americans? What actually is the Electoral College and how did that come into being, right? So it's not just that these things exist, but looking at things that are particularly, at the time, we did it 2 years ago, not at this last election, but the previous one, so 4 years ago, my goodness. At the time where it was topical, obviously it was an election year, but there were all these things about the mechanics of elections and what was happening that people just were not really understanding. So what it did was it gave all kinds of people information that they didn't have, or they hadn't thought about if they did have it, right? And how it was playing out in the present moment. Right. But I think that's really a lot of what we do, particularly as a global majority, institutions, we really are looking at those things that maybe members of our community know, but other people may not know, or concepts, ideas that need to be lifted up as we begin to tell these stories in the present day.
And Woody, are you doing the same thing? You have a movement that is 150 years old, and we're talking about contemporary audiences. This March to Freedom didn't stop 150 years ago, right? Nope. It's ongoing. How do you keep that current, and how do you create a connection with somebody who might not have the background that you have?
Well, it's a constant challenge. I agree with what Neil is saying, and it's a constant challenge. It's a battle. I mean, we have people come in the museum, and some people, depending upon where they are in their journey around equity and inclusion and so forth, will come in, and we have people leaving here in a lot of tears. A lot of times, they'll never go back. We have people who come in and are inspired. Say, I didn't know that. This information is not out there. It's not. I had never heard this before. I was not taught this in school or whatever the case might be. I want to go learn more about this. And it's taking these combination of smaller steps among a lot of different people to try to keep change moving in the right direction and so forth. So what we do is a lot of what Neil is suggesting. We do public programs connected to our mission, and we have a diverse range of that. We try to have musical kind of programs. I wish I was in Motown. He's got a good setup there. But we try to do musical. We try to connect. We've got a thing where we're connecting performing arts with social justice to kind of show people the importance of music in terms of social justice movements over time, and making that connection. And that helps attract different audiences and so forth. We also are working very hard to try to help people to understand and connect past with the present, because we do equity and inclusion, DEI training. And, one of the biggest responses we get from people who come in is like, boy, I had no idea. We're right on the banks of the Ohio River. That's, you're looking in my background there, right on the banks. And we can take people out on one of our floors and out on the balcony and kind of say, that was the difference between freedom and slavery. just this river. Now, it was much narrower at the time, but boy, did it make a big difference in terms of people's lives. And the other thing is that we are focusing. We're one of the few museums around that have a permanent exhibition on human trafficking. We've been working in this space for several years, and we've got a permanent exhibition in that space. And we're trying to upgrade that and build it out. A lot of people, when they hear human trafficking, they think automatically they defer to sex trafficking, when in fact, the biggest problem is in forced labor. And so it's information like that, keeping it relevant, keeping it fresh, and showing people that, yeah, the change may have come off X number of years or so ago, but let's show you how this concept of freedom or unfreedom is still existing today in these different forms that may not. Mass incarceration is another one. So we partner with various organizations, that are like-minded in our mission, and do everything we can in terms of, first of all, educating and informing people, and then giving them that knowledge and really asking them to think about at least one thing that they do differently to help us meet our mission and social justice for this country as a result of their visit here.
It's so great that you talk about intersectionality, Woody, and I think that you both, but particularly Woody, given the topic of your museum, you're in a great position to talk about that intersectionality when people become an object, and that object is bought and sold. There's the direct connection to commerce. When they are enslaved, there is a direct connection to incarceration and the mechanisms of incarceration. When they are exploited, when their labor is exploited, there's a direct connection to workforce development, because to exploit, you have to limit opportunity in order to keep people exploited. Neil, how do you explore these types of topics that are outside of the topics that a traditional arts museum or even a culture or history museum talk about, and talking about the creators of the objects and how they found their way to that expression and eventually to being exhibited in your museum?
Well, I think a lot of what we do, just as museum professionals, is providing context to objects, to programs, to everything that we do, right? And so whether it's an object, whether it's a work of art, whether it's an artist that we particularly are fond of or want to put on view, our learning and engagement team works really hard to create a broad context for those experiences to live in. And frankly, many different dimensions to it. To your earlier question, why and I think how we attract different audiences, different ages, they consume art and culture in different ways, right? Is that we develop around our programs activities, which then expand the impact of that particular exhibit or that performance, right? So that's part of what we do as educators, right? And it's part of what we do too in lifting up these untold stories. It's useful not just to hear the story, but to hear all the reasons why it might have been omitted, frankly, all right, are not included in the canon of what people know, right? There are legitimate reasons for that as well, right? And that's all part of context, right? Giving it a place to live so that people get the total, well, why don't I know this? Well, there are reasons why you were never told that.
I look at your James Baldwin exhibit right now,
Yeah.
Which was done by Sabrina Nelson.
Sabrina Nelson, yeah.
It's amazing that man's stories and his life and his sensibility. I discovered a video that he shot, which people thought was lost, about Bayview Hunters Point. And we had recruited the person who was actually helping to develop that area. And so I discovered this as sort of the background research that we were doing on the position and on the history there. Talk a little bit about taking somebody like James Baldwin, who lived a while ago. Many people have not read his works, and telling that story and contextualizing it, mapping those issues to some of the issues that Woody was talking about.
Well, I mean, James Baldwin is such a rich topic. His life, his career, it has so many different dimensions to it that there is no shortage of ways in which you can create an exhibit about Baldwin. I think what Sabrina and her team did exceptionally well is they personalize that work for themselves, so they have a personal connection that they are able to draw out in the exhibit to the stories and to some of his works. They also are using a lot of new technologies. They're using AI. They're using QR codes. They're using a lot of different mechanisms to actually augment, and that's actually what I meant, augmented reality, not AI, that in the exhibit itself, so that you don't just get what's on the walls, right? You also have the ability to delve even deeper into any individual theme or story that she outlines. It's a really it's a brilliant exhibit. It's in a relatively small gallery, but it's one of the things that people are increasingly coming in to see.
And you talk about slavery today, Woody. You had made reference to that. How do you personalize that for somebody who, I happen to be fortunate enough to be secure in where my next meal is going to be coming from. That was not always the case with my family. How do you make that slavery, contemporary slavery, accessible and understandable to me, who is not living that life? And even people whose forebears were slaves, they're not living that life today. How do you make that accessible through your exhibition here on modern day human slavery and trafficking?
Well, what we do is, let's just talk about that particular exhibit. We call it Invisible. And the key point around that, and really the branding of that particular exhibition as a permanent exhibition, is around the fact that modern day slavery, enslavement, we call it, can be right in front of you. And if you don't know what to look for, it's right there, and you don't know what to look for. And so what we try to do is to educate people around the signs of human trafficking, whether it's forced labor or sex trafficking or whatever the case might be. So we have some educational programs around that, and we're actually planning some mothers that we're taking outside of the Freedom Center, some training programs that we're trying to get in with people who might be subjected or potentially subjected to forced trafficking, so they can understand it themselves. And it's hard to find those individuals. And also, we're trying to develop some training, and we're collaborating with some people to basically kind of go out for these organizations that are involved with hiring or might be closest to possibly hiring some of these folks who might be trafficked, to let them know what the risks are, what they need to look for, and signs of human trafficking and so forth. We have an exhibit that we curated it using actual traffic victims, and we call it Shine the Light. And it kind of gets more to this was our first big step into, we're not where Neil is. We're trying to, first big step into interactivity and bringing more technology. So we had them to do some video. We put some information up, and we've got this technology where they can put this flashlight on an image on the wall, and this individual there, it will activate a video where this individual was actually trafficked, would basically start talking and telling something about their stories, so that people can see that and kind of say, man, that could have happened to anybody. That could have happened to me, and I never knew about it. So we're trying to really kind of break it down where it's not this big issue that it's hard to wrap your arms around it, just trying to put it into more personalized stories that people can see. And we're trying to develop some training programs for various organizations and take this information outside of the Freedom Center as best we can to share it with other people and inspire them to get involved, get engaged, and know what to look for. I know I've been traveling quite a bit over the last few months. And one of the things I've noticed as I've gone through, particularly the major airports, is there's a significant emphasis coming in these airports. You walk through our airport, and I was up Detroit not long ago. I was in Atlanta and places. they have signs throughout the airport now. I see a lot more along the concourses where they're trying to bring attention to this issue around trafficking. And so what we want to try to do is try to be a part of that and build on it and do what we can in our little space to try to help people to see these things that might be right in front of them that they may not know, and how to identify and recognize, and importantly, what to do when they spot these particular potential signals.
Superb. I want to inflect a little bit to the business side of this. A lot of people feel like the markets can resolve everything, right? The markets. Just go to the market. Just go to commercial space. The thing that strikes me is that there's no incentive structure that really is about things like justice or dealing with knowledge of truth. There's no real incentive structure. If you can make money through a lie, there's an incentive structure quite on the contrary to tell the lie so you can make money off of the lie, right? There's no incentive structure that is about knowing history and knowing different perspectives. So there are a lot of gaps in this sort of market-based idea that the market solves everything. The real question that I have is that you also deal in a market. You have a budget, right? You have income. You have earned and contributed income streams. You then convert those into programs. Talk a little bit about, if you will, the challenges of creating this organization that is filling this gap in a market-based economy, in a market-based responsive system, in a way that also is very financially responsible, that uses every dollar wisely, and that ensures that what you're spending connects to your audiences and gives them an experience that they want to repeat. Neil, could you give a cut on that in terms of your budget scale, your size, and how you actually put this whole thing together day after day, month after month, year after year?
Well, I cannot say it other than it's very challenging. It's a very challenging environment to raise the kind of dollars to keep the quality not only of the facility that we have, but of the staff. You know, staffs have increasingly more demands for what they will or will not do and will not work for. And, you know, we have been working in Detroit with the legislature and with the state on trying to find a sustainable revenue stream for the institution outside of philanthropy. The other thing, a lot of our communities, I think Detroit is somewhat of an exception in this way, but there aren't a lot of deep pocket, rich folks who want to support a African American museum, right? They're just, there may be a few very prominent, very wealthy people in the community, but certainly not enough when you think of all the other organizations that are looking for that time and talent to support an institution like ours, right? Detroit, having had so many, particularly with the car companies and et cetera, we did and do have a lot of Black executives that are C-suite executives, for example, in Detroit. That's unusual, right? And even with us and with our, board and supporters, it's very challenging. I think we raise every 9 months, we have to generate from philanthropy or earn income about $9 million. Our budget is about $13 million now, $13 million. So it's challenging, particularly in a climate where people question the very existence of organizations like ours. Do we need, and why do we need an African American museum? We have the DIA, a very prominent, beautiful exhibit literally right next door, right? But, I often say, well, did you just want French restaurants, or did you want French restaurants and Mexican restaurants and Italian restaurants? And there's a nuance to those cuisines.
That's a great answer. That's a great. Is that a great answer? I mean, it's like
you just want one kind of look, feel, whatever. You want to have that variety, and the knowledge that comes with that, right? I also say, of course, if you want to get information about a culture, wouldn't you really want to have it from the culture from which that history, in this case, emanates, right? And not from folks who have studied the culture perhaps and know a lot about it, but they haven't lived it, So
And
I
Woody, do
think
you have similar challenges in Cincinnati as Neil was describing in terms of fundraising and gathering audiences, or do you have this problem licked?
Far
I
from
know the
it.
answer.
Yeah, thank you. Far from it. It's a battle. It's a real challenge, as Neil pointed out. And one of the things that, from our standpoint, that may be a little different, I don't know, is that we do not get any operating support from public funding. And a very tiny amount of funding for capital. I mean, a very tiny, and that comes very sparingly and so forth. So it's all dependent upon us to go out and really make the case for why people ought to invest in the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center, while we're continuing to work in all aspects of funding that we can to try to get some public funding. We make our trip to Columbus, but the current political landscape is not favorable for our type of museums at this point in time. It is, very, very hard to get any money at the state level. Limited success at the local level. I will say that we've had a little better success at the federal level. I must say we have really good relationships with our senators and so forth from Ohio, at least at this point. But we have to. Our budget is just a little better than half of what Neil pointed out. We're somewhere around $78 million that we have to, and we're very dependent upon contributed revenue. We're fortunate that we've got some corporations that have been with us a long time that have been very, very good in terms of helping us. We have basically been reaching out. We can get certain, in terms of one of our strategies is around collaboration. And so there's some capabilities that you need that you just don't have, you can't afford. So we've been very fortunate to be able to build relationships with some major corporations here in town that we can tap into from time to time, and they'll have resources available that they can provide to us. But getting the quality of people that you need to run an organization of this nature and take it where you want to take it, it's very, very challenging. Not only getting them, but retaining them. It's a big challenge, and training and developing them and developing the leadership capability you need. One of the strategies I'm looking at this point in time to try to show more, try to get better investment from and funding from our public entities is basically trying to show what the impact is on the economy. So business development, economic activity development is very, very important around here. And we were fortunate enough, we participated in a study about a year ago, maybe a year and a half or so ago, with a lot of arts organizations in this region. It was a regional study that was done by our chamber and also Archway, which is a big organization here. And what surprised a lot of people was that the Freedom Center, National Underground Railroad Freedom Center, ranked number 10 in this region as far as economic impact. That surprised a lot of people and caught a lot of attention. And so now we're trying to work more collaboratively with our chamber, with other organizations, and trying to show that, when people are looking to relocate businesses, put headquarters, expand, et cetera, we know from a visit we just did with Atlanta, we went on an executive leadership exchange in Atlanta, that cultural institutions, diversity, that type of quality of life issues are very high on a lot of the people they're trying to recruit, hire, and retain these days. And they look for institutions like that. So it's incumbent upon me to try to make a stronger case to the elected officials and to others in the region here to kind of show what the impact is that we're bringing in terms of attracting people to our economic base here in this particular region of the country. And that's kind of new thinking. Just started to evolve that over the last few months or so ago. But it is a very, very difficult road to charter with this negative context and disinformation that's been put out there about CRT and things along that line. It's just, like constantly having to push against that. And then you run into situations where, it seems like when we take either people of color take a step forward, Black people take a step forward, you're going to always get some sort of significant backlash. And so you got to withstand that and then try to put on, get ready for the next change. People don't like to talk about DEI anymore. They want to, that's kind of has negative connotations. So how do you deal with that and stay authentic and true to what your mission is all about, what it's always been about, and what it's going to be about? So it's a lot of different things you have to deal with, but we're going to be here for a while. We've got really good, solid support. We need more, and we're going to get more, but it's a day-to-day battle.
Well, you're both making a very compelling case. America should be about difference of views, difference of thinking. It is the collaboration amongst people of different perspectives and different histories that creates great economies, that creates great cities, that creates a vibrant life. And we're all so isolated. Look at us here. Instead of having a meeting in person, we're able to meet from across the country. That's wonderful in its own way. A little bit isolating, and people want to have connection. They can have connection at the Wright. They can have connection at the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center. They can have an enriched experience, an enjoyable experience, coming away more knowledgeable, but also more connected to everyone, to their own history, regardless of race, and to the history of people who are different than us. It is really a gift that you're creating and that your staffs are creating. Neil Barclay, president of the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History in Detroit, Michigan, and Woody Keown, Jr., president and COO of the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center in Cincinnati, Ohio. Thank you so much for helping me to understand the work of your museums. Please thank your staffs. Please thank your donors. Please thank the businesses that support you. Please thank your volunteers. It is just so wonderful. It is a gift to all of us, what you're doing. So let's keep going. Let's support. And by the way, everybody watching, donate and attend. Be part of the solution. We will have the country we spend money on, right? We will have the country we pay attention to. So let's all do it. It's in our power.